This is 40K Today. 40K news that's harder to get rid of than a fully charged unit of Bullgrin. In cover.
Welcome to 40K Today. This is your daily 15-minute news, views, and interview show that covers the entire hobby of Warhammer 40,000. I'm your host, John Damaris, and today on the program, Rob Jones from Goonhammer drops some knowledge about what a 40K Spring FAQ should look like, and Steve Joel catches up with Philip Spence, and they answer the age-old question, how the heck do I get my models to where I'm going easily and safely? We're running a poll on Facebook and looking for the answer to this question. Have you tried playing the game on Tabletop Simulator yet? And how's it working out? We've had some movement now, and we're closing in on 40% of people saying that they actually have tried TTS. And Adam Baumeier took the time to write this nice note. I played quite a few games, and I'm currently in 2 different tournaments. It takes a minute to get used to the controls, and there's a few mods, dice rolling box, dice counting mat, that I feel are basically required to do it in any reasonable amount of time. While I would much rather play in person, it's a fantastic tool to keep the rust from getting too thick. Also very helpful to have a chance to try out lists before you commit to buying or painting models, and that can't be understated. So if you guys want to leave a comment, please come to our Facebook at 40K Today and check out the poll, participate in that, and leave us a comment. We'd like to hear what your experience with TTS is like. So moving on, if you love deep dives into 40K subjects, and you have probably come across Goonhammer. Goonhammer is one of the very best places to find long-form written content about the game we all love. There's also a lot of hilarious stuff going on over there. I was lucky enough to sit down with Rob Jones and talk about an article that they recently featured about what the newest FAQ should have in it. We had a great discussion about the article, and you should definitely check the show notes to read more. All right, Robert from Goonhammer, let's talk about the mythical FAQ that was supposed to come out in April. It doesn't look like it's probably going to happen, but you guys did a really interesting article over on Goonhammer about it. When I think you had some guests like Richard Siegler on to do that with you guys. You want to talk about what you guys sort of came to for conclusions and some of the highlights of that article?
Yeah, absolutely. So we sat down and we started talking about, one of the big things that we thought was a shame was that with no Adepticon, we really weren't likely to get an FAQ this April. And so we started talking about, okay, well, what would even be in it if we had it? What would we have liked to have seen? And so, we got Richard around and we did a roundtable on it. And I think the general consensus was that the meta is in a pretty good place right now, post Space Marine Doctrines nerf. But there were a few things that we felt like should still be in it. A lot of the big ones were some factions right now still can't compete. And that's even with Psychic Awakening changes. So if you look at like Gene Stealer cults, the aberrant nerfs have really kind of left the faction in a place where they used to be the dominant half of Forces of the Hive Mind army, and now they're tag-alongs. And so there's probably, given the number of changes we had late last year to the faction and the way Marines came up, it ends up, in retrospect, you look at that nerf and you're like, okay, well, that was a bit too much. It's also, there's some interactions with Master of the Machines and Father of the Future from Faith and Fury that are both pretty egregious and we think are going to cause some problems. We disagreed with Richard on the Daedalosis and his aura. I think it's probably going to get worse. And then overall, just little quality of life improvements. There are a lot of things right now from a timing standpoint in the rules for 40K around what can happen at the end of a phase or at the start of a phase. And that's language that kind of varies over the last 20 or so codexes and needs to be cleaned up.
Yeah, so I mean, 40K can be improved a lot if they went to some standardized verbiage with meanings and had like a glossary that they worked from. But that's neither here nor there.
Well, they've been getting better about it over the last.
They have been,
the last few books.
You're absolutely right, and even across 8th edition, right? They're more consistent than they have ever been, in my opinion. So one thing that I think is kind of interesting is I'd like to hear your take on where you think the meta is, because we don't have any data, we don't have any events, we actually don't know what the competitive landscape looks like. The data that we have right before COVID hit was a lot of new things were starting to win tournaments, which was interesting. And I wondered if that was going to stay or if the Marine players were going to figure out, okay, they took my ball away from me. Where's my new ball? And then if they were going to move back into dominance. So like, where do you think the meta was going and where do you think it'll end up once we come out of COVID?
Yeah, it's crazy. We really only had like about a week and a half, 2 weeks of data from tournaments, maybe like 6 events that were post FAQ on Marines, because we still had a couple of events that were using the pre FAQ Marine rules. I think Marines are still going to be top tier, even with the changes. There's still a very compelling Iron Hands list to make. There's still a very compelling Raven Guard or Raven Guard successors list that you can field. They're just not they're just not going to be nearly as dominant because.
Well, my prediction is now we'll see people start digging into, because of the doctrine changes, we'll start seeing Space Marine soup armies, and they can make some pretty interesting builds that you can't get out of a mono faction. So like that might become the new normal. We'll see. But that's my theory, is that there'll be some concoction of a Space Marine soup, because they still get their doctrines, right? They just don't get their super doctrine, which doesn't really matter at this point.
Oh, absolutely. And I think we're going to see a much bigger emphasis on the Space Marine armies that can stay in assault doctrine, or that want to be in assault doctrine. So Saga the Beast, I thought, actually got a really bad rap. Like, I think Space Wolves are pretty solid now and are capable of competing at higher levels. I think John Kilcullen's going to be real happy to hear me preaching to be preaching on his behalf on this one. But yeah, I think White Scars and Blood Angels too suddenly have new life, whereas before, and it wasn't even that they weren't good enough, it's just that there wasn't enough of a compelling reason to take them over other Marine options. Yep. And now suddenly you start looking at those and you're like, okay, well, now that I'm going to go to Assault Doctrine as quickly as possible, things haven't changed for my army. How do I make that work? What does that look like? And now maybe I consider those instead.
Yeah. And who knows what else you'll see? Like, maybe you'll see, like some mix of Iron Hands to hold objectives, with the tougher intercessors. And then you could mix in an assault element with some wolves, or like you said, some scars, or, there's just a lot of options where you could sort of mix and match the different chapters now, and probably create something that is more inherently powerful because of the additional access to stratagems, the additional characters that you can put into your army than what we were seeing before. So that'll be interesting to see how it shakes out.
Yeah, and as someone who just wrote like 45,000 words on Chaos Space Marines and how to play them, it's one of the things that struck me was, especially if you look at like the Battlefield Birmingham results, there's a lot more diversity coming out of the Chaos Space Marine faction right now and what Chaos can do. I think that's going to continue to expand and get explored when we come back. There are a lot of different ways to play that army now, a lot of new things that you can do with Thousand Suns, and a lot of different units that suddenly have value, where if you start looking at that army, it's not just Possessed, it's not just Lord of Skulls. There are a lot of different builds and a lot of different units that work. It's a very exciting time to be a Chaos Space Marine player, and I look forward to it to being completely blown up again when Engine War comes out and suddenly knights are everywhere. So
it'll be interesting for sure. Well, again, thank you for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
That's Rob, one of the founders of Goonhammer. Make sure you check out goonhammer.com. It's certainly worth the time invested. Next, we have the technology, right? We talk about one of the most efficient and easiest ways to transport your models with the power of magnets. Today's episode of 40K Today is brought to you by Frontline Gaming. Frontline Gaming is a one-stop shop for all your Warhammer hobby needs, discounted products, American-made gaming mats and terrain, and a full line of miniatures painting service and daily hobby content. And this can all be found at frontlinegaming.org. Welcome back. Human ingenuity has been at the forefront of our advancements all across time. If there's a problem, humans will certainly find interesting ways to solve them. And let's be honest for a second. Transporting our beautifully painted miniatures is one of the absolute worst parts of the hobby. We've come a long ways from tossing your minis in a box like those little green plastic army men of old. Steve Joel speaks with Philip Spence about transporting your army with ease and style.
Thanks, John. Yeah, actually, before we get to talking about the travel cases, I started out by asking Philip about how long he's been in the hobby.
I sort of started off back in, the early 90s, I think, sort of back when I was a wee teenager. And then when I went to university, I had a break like most people do. I think that was like for a good 10 years. And then my friend Richard got me back into the hobby, which is sort of where I got into the whole content creation, because obviously at that point there was lots of YouTube channels around, and I really liked that, and I just wanted a way of sort of sharing the work that I'm doing with other people. So I've got a YouTube channel where I do tutorials and sort of general project videos that people might find interesting, and then I've also got like a Facebook and Instagram account where I post a bit more regularly in terms of stuff I'm working on.
And also podcasting, is that right?
Yeah, so me and a couple of my friends, Dan and Joe, We do a podcast called Look Out, Sir.
Very
We've
nice.
been doing that for about a year and a half now.
Isn't it a shame Look Out Sir isn't a thing anymore? But for the if people are
I-
only just getting involved, Look Out Sir used to be a thing. Used to be a
Yeah, it's now an Age of Sigma thing, which I think is a little bit confusing, but we wanted to nod to the old rules that was present, I think, back in 6th and 7th edition.
Very nice. So you can look up Philip on Beyond the Tabletop and also Look Out Sir. Beyond the Tabletop, so much content. I mean, there are so many videos there and a Patreon and all sorts. So, and all the links will be in the show notes for this episode. So let's talk about the cases, because this is what got my attention the other day. You've gone and got yourself a magnetic case.
Yes.
I have also invested in one, which is why I wanted to talk to you, because yours and mine are very different. And I think the problems with mine, your one solves. So I'm going to start with the problems with mine if I can. I've got a Magna rack, and I like it, and I've magnetized the entirety of my Thousand Sons and Demons armies so that they can go on this, and a surprising amount fits into the rack, and it's great. But the main problem it has is just getting the models in and under each shelf, because there is no ability to slide shelves out. So I like it. The other problem I'm finding is, and it's not a massive problem, but it's cumbersome. It's very heavy inside the battle foam pack that I have. So those are the two main issues. So let's talk about what you've gone and bought, because it's got the slidey out shelves, which is just, why doesn't everyone do that?
Yeah, so I picked mine up from, I think it's called A Case, but the website is army-case.com. That's where I got it from. I wanted one that was specifically suitable for traveling on planes, so I had to fit in the overflight sort of hand luggage section.
Right.
I did a bit of research online and tried to find a whole bunch of different cases that would suit my needs. And this one, they do have the sliding out tray, so you can pull them out completely. And then when you put them in on the shelf, there's these two little locking pins which hold the tray in place. So if you were tipping it on the side, which is probably what you will be doing if you're storing it, nothing's going to fall out.
Right. So one of the big things I found with the magnets, or the appeal of it, was just the speed of getting models back in. If you're playing a game, I mean, I love my battle foam case. Everybody starts off with the Citadel one, and it's fine until you play Drukhari and you get pointy models and all the bits break off. And so then you need to go and get something else. So I tried battle foam. I really love it. I mean, I love it. It's lightweight, and you can, the pluck foam you can adjust to any size, and it comes with all sorts anyway. But just the amount of time sort of getting models back into each individual little compartment. The magnets help with that, right? I mean, that's a big appeal of having one. You can just kind of put them back on really fast. But the sliding out racks is just genius, because actually I have found it takes just as much time to try and squeeze your hand and tiny models in underneath to each shelf.
I'd hate to be doing that. That sounds quite fiddly, especially if the trays are quite close together.
Yeah.
Then it'd make it more difficult. With this one, it's adjustable, so obviously you can slide them out, but there's a whole bunch of sizes. So like with the one I've got, I can have two relatively small trays, which are just right for infantry, and then that gives me space at the bottom for a much bigger one, which I tested out today and is just big enough for the repulsor on its base with the annoying little aerials on the turret. So for the repulsor tank, it fits in nicely, and you should be able to get, I think, 3 sort of sideways in the tray. So it should, be able to transport a decent amount of an army.
So if we can compare it to the Citadel case that you start with, and then say something like battle foam, which a lot of people have gone to, how do you rate it? Where would you put it?
I would say it's probably at the top, but it is a premium product. Like it's not cheap, it's quite expensive, but it's sort of worth it, and it'll be my one travel case now, and then my older cases will potentially I'll just be using for storage.
That's our own Steve Joel speaking with Philip Spence. We're winding down, but before we say goodbye, it's time for Model of the Day.
It's the model of the day, the model of the day, the model of the day.
Today's Model of the Day is an absolutely inspirational piece. MB Shizun from over on Instagram has created a dramatic keeper of secrets with stunning use of color and highlights. Using a beautiful palette of purple, pink, blue, and gold, the amount of skill on display here, well, it's staggering. The cloth elements on this model will absolutely blow your mind, as will the beautiful decorative base and the attention to detail. Check our Facebook for pictures and details. If you have a model that you want us to feature on the show, or you've seen a model that we should feature, don't hesitate to let us know. We're always on the lookout for cool stuff to show off. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us. A big thanks to our content producer, Alex Painter, our social media guru, Tanya Gates, and our technical producer, Seamus Ronan, for all their hard work once again in putting this program together. And a special thanks to you, the listener, who we appreciate very, very much. If you like the show and want to help us out, could you just share this with one other person and help us get the word out? And make sure you join us tomorrow on the show where we speak with Brad Chester from The Art of War with some hot tips for list building and iterating. And we hear about an unlikely hero from the bottom of the world. Well, we'll see you then. Until tomorrow, I'm John Damaris for Steve Joel, and that's what's happening in 40K Today.